Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini, and I'm back. Video number 7. We're almost there to the end. This is the one before the last video that closes out our Butterick 6214 video sew-along series. Now, if you're just coming to my channel, make sure that you click the subscribe button if you like what you see. And if you want to check out the previous videos in this specific sew-along, I've included a link for you in the description box below. And you can also just do a search on YouTube for Butterick 6214 and then just type in the words Crafty Gemini and my videos will pop right up for you. As you can see, I'm wearing the finished top, so this is the one that you're learning how to make. I chose to make it out of a rayon challis because I love that it takes on properties of a natural fiber because rayon is made from wood pulp. It's super lightweight, has great drape, and I think it's just a great overall lightweight woven fabric to work with. I live in Florida, so I definitely need stuff like this, either cotton or rayon and things like that. So I think it's a great place to start. I hope you enjoyed this video. We're going to jump right to it because we are almost done sewing up our top. Once you've completed the hems on both your sleeves, we're going to move on to the next step, which is to put the sleeves inside the top. And so you can follow the directions here. What it says to basically put with right sides together, you're going to pin the sleeves into the armhole. And so you're going to match up some of those markings. If you recall, we marked on the wrong side of our fabric a couple of different points. One, we had a large circle basically at the top of that wavy kind of a shape. And then to the left and to the right of it, we had smaller circles. And so you should have those markings on the wrong side of your sleeve pieces, okay? You're gonna mark that, make sure that you're matching those points. Then once you have your sleeves pinned into position, you're gonna stitch, which again, remember, it's a construction seam because we're gonna be adding the sleeves to the top, so you still wanna stick with the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance that's stated in the pattern sheet. And then it tells you to stitch again 1/4 of an inch away in the seam allowance. After that, you'll trim close to your stitching line. You're gonna press the seam allowances flat and turn the seam toward the sleeve. Now, a lot of you are probably wondering what in the world all that means, and I find that this is where it gets a little bit confusing because a lot of beginners can't even figure out the first couple of steps there and then get totally lost with the extra row of stitching, trimming, and then trying to figure out how to press these seam allowances flat and turning the seams into the sleeve and all that because this is kind of a tight space. But let's set the pattern sheet aside. Let's grab our top and I'll show you how to pin the sleeves into position. All right, so at this point, I would recommend that you try it on. That way you can see if you're kind of on track for a decent enough completion of the garment. If you can't even get it on, or if you're swimming in it and you do not want to wear it, or you know you're not gonna wear it, then I would say probably you're not gonna wanna waste your time completing the top. However, if you feel like you're on track or it's turning out pretty decent and you wanna continue, then you can move along, and then all we really have to do is attach our sleeves, which have already been hemmed, so that will be done. Then you just attach the neck binding here and then hem the bottom of the shirt. Also, what you can do by trying it on at this point is to determine whether or not you're kind of on par for the length of the finished top that you want to have. And you can see, kind of take some measurements and decide whether or not you need to change the hemline, cut a bunch of it off, or whatever you need to do. But since the front and the back have been put together, you can pretty much gauge how the finished top is going to look by trying it on at this point. So the next step is to insert these sleeves. So I like to visually place everything the way that it's going to go because I find that it minimizes the kind of room for error. What a lot of beginners tend to do is like, okay, I'm ready to attach the sleeves. They'll grab a sleeve and say, okay, I know how the sleeve goes in like this, and then sew it on, and then something is wrong with the sleeves. So instead of kind of having your fabric wrong side out and your sleeves wrong side out, just take a few minutes. Put the shirt pretty side of the fabric facing out, facing you the way you're going to wear it. Remember, the lower neckline is the front, the higher one is the back. So put it just like if it's on somebody and you're going to be looking at them from the front. Then I take a sleeve and place it where I know it needs to be inserted. If you're unfamiliar with the shape of a sleeve, the bigger circle that we had at the top part of the outermost curve here is going to be lined up with the shoulder seam. And so the curve part goes in this way when it gets sewn in this kind of shape. Now, because that looks right does not mean that that's where it goes necessarily. You have to look at the notches that you clipped into the sleeve piece. So if I look at this sleeve, it looks good and it looks right like it goes there, but when I spread my fabric out here to find my notches, I have a double notch right here. And do you recall from a previous video where I said single notches are for the front of the garment and double notches should be on the back of the garment. Well then, if this is facing the front, right, this is the front of the top, and I insert this like this, I will have a single notch on the top part matched to a double notch on the sleeve piece, and that's incorrect, right? A double notch here needs to go on the back of a shirt. So how is it going to go? I can't flip it this way so that those double notches are back that way because there's nothing to match up. And I know that this short little seam that we sewed here has to go down in the armpit section of the top. So the only other way that it can go is double notches here, flipped face down, and it belongs on the other sleeve, right? On the other arm opening, the opposite side. So now, same orientation as I had it here previously, but if I look at the notches, now I have a single notch on the front, which is going to perfectly match my single notch on the front of the top of the bodice piece here. And if I sneak under here and look, I see my two slits on the back side, which should be lined up, again, with the two notch slits on the back piece. So now I know this sleeve has to go on this side. And to make sure that you cut your sleeve pieces correctly, just stop to double check the other piece. If this gets sewn in here, let me make sure I have a single notch on the front, and I do, and a double notch on the back, and I do. So now I know this sleeve goes here, and this one goes on the other side. So now that I have it visually placed and oriented correctly, we can move on to the next step, which is going to be pinning our sleeve into the arm opening. So now I have my regular presser foot back on because we're moving on to a construction seam this time. I don't have a hemming foot on here anymore. I need to sew the sleeve into the body of the garment with my regular presser foot. I have some pins here. To place the sleeve inside, a lot of this has to do with personal preference and what you end up doing a lot of whenever you make garments, okay? But the key thing is you're going to sew these two pieces together the same way you sew everything else. Pretty sides to pretty sides touching. So how can I place this sleeve in here so that the pretty sides of each are touching? Well, let's say we start down here with the armpit seam that goes down here. I know that needs to be matched up right here. And because I have a seam going down here and down the side of my top, I'm going to match those up because I want them to match perfectly. And so now I see that if I do this, in order to have pretty side to pretty side, the whole sleeve needs to be turned wrong side out and draped over the arm opening. So once you figure that out in your head, you'll have a better idea of how to pin. So I'm going to pin this at the armpit sleeve here. So now I've reached through here and I have the larger circle marking. Remember I said that is the center of the top of the sleeve cap. So that needs to be matched up with that shoulder seam allowance. And basically where the large circle is, it's a marking that's 5/8 of an inch down from the raw edge. So that's where it's going to cross at your seam allowance. But still match up the raw edges. Remember to put that shoulder seam allowance towards the back. And I'm going to match up the large opening where the seam is. So I know I have it nicely centered. And I'm just going to place a pin right there. Okay. And then I see how the top or the sleeve ends up. It ends up being wrong side out so that the pretty side of the sleeve can match the pretty side of the actual bodice piece. So now on your sleeve, remember to the right and to the left of the larger circle marking, we had smaller ones. Well, if you also recall on the bodice piece, you also had some markings. So the idea is that these marks are 5/8 of an inch in from the raw edges, and the one on the shirt on the top of our blouse, right, has to match that one that's on the sleeve. So you just line them up where they are. And if it's hard for you to see kind of by flipping the fabric forward and backwards like this to kind of see where they are, another quick tip is for the same way that we marked it. Insert the pin in one mark and then look over on the other fabric piece, which is my blouse in this case, and I am going to insert that pin right through it. So where they both are now going through the markings, I can just stop for a minute. Don't move it. I'm going to remove that pin and place it right along that raw edge. So it's really simple. You're just using these guidelines, taking your time, and matching them where the pattern already told you to match them. So on this one, the ink is going through the front of the fabric, so I can more easily match these two up. So that goes there. Match up the raw edges of the fabric and pin. Okay, so this is how my first sleeve is going to go pinned, and I'm going to use the same 5/8 of an inch seam allowance that we've been using for all of our other construction seams and sew it around here. Now for setting in the sleeve, you are probably going to end up coming up with your own preferred method of how to do this. I like to stitch it from the inside because my sewing machine is set into a table, meaning I can't just drape this over the free arm of my machine because it's set flat in here. So that's one reason that I'm sewing from the inside. And then some people will do some gathering stitches here and kind of gather the sleeve cap into the bodice of the shirt. I find that I don't need to do that. It might just come with experience and time. Definitely practice some. I find that I just need a few pins and a couple different reference points, and then I will use my fingers to ease in the fabric in the sections where I have no pins. So I'm lining this edge up with my 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And my key tip for you here is to try and make sure that the section where the needle is about to stitch through is not puckered or pleated like that. If that section where the fabric is going under the needle is smooth, then your stitches will turn out smooth in the end. And I have a notch here that I need to match. So when you come up on those notches, ease that fabric in and make it match. And whenever I stop with the needle down so I don't lose my spot. And then I'm coming up on the double notches, so make sure that those match too, and then you'll know that you're almost to the end and you did a great job setting in your sleeve. And I'll do a couple back stitches at the end. And there it is. The sleeve has been set. Now it's telling us, remember it said stitch, so we did that. Then it says stitch another 1/4 of an inch into the seam allowance away from this edge. So now that all that is set, I'm basically just going to do the same thing, a 1/4 of an inch away from that line. Now for a 1/4 of an inch into the seam allowance means this stitch line that we just did is the furthest you want to go into your garment, okay? So that's what was allotted for the finished size that you cut out and that you're sewing. So when they tell you another line of stitching a 1/4 of an inch into the seam allowance, it means it needs to be into the seam allowance. This is excess stuff, right? Excess fabric that is not accounted for in the finished top. So that is where you want to do this extra line of stitching. Do not come in and do a 1/4 of an inch to the left. You're now going to end up with a way smaller garment, okay? Or smaller, at least tighter in the sleeves in this case, since it's just a seam that we're doing in the sleeves. But you don't want to do that because you're going to be taking in more fabric on both sleeves. Instead, stitch to the right of this line a 1/4 of an inch into the seam allowance. So that's what you should have, is 2 seams. So the first one should be where all your markings are, which is the full 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then the second line of stitching should be a 1/4 of an inch to the right or into the seam allowance from that initial first line of stitching. Then it says to trim away close to this second line of stitching. So you're going to take some shears, and I would probably use pinking shears in this case. I don't see where mine are right here, but the idea is to trim close to the second line of stitching and make sure that you're not cutting into your actual top, but you're going to stitch or cut here. And I'm not grabbing both layers. There we go. And just cut close to that second line of stitching, because basically that second row of stitching is going to stop the fabric from fraying further into the main construction seam. Does that make sense? I would go in there with pinking shears just to help keep the rayon challis from fraying, because as you can see, it does fray quite a bit. Then you would press the seams flat first and then toward the sleeve. So going out and not in towards the body. So out towards the sleeve. And you can see that that sleeve looks super cute inserted right there. And since it's already hemmed, it's good to go. So you're going to repeat the same thing to install or insert the other sleeve. And again, I would recommend visually setting it up for yourself first, then flipping it so that pretty sides are touching, and then proceeding with inserting your pins to then go ahead and sew it. So I'm going to do this to this one, and then I'll meet you back here. All right, I got my pinking shears. I'm going to turn the sleeves wrong side out, and I'm going to carefully trim down the seam allowance just as I was instructed to do so in the seam allowance of where we added the sleeve. So and if you don't have pinking shears, just use your regular scissors and just cut close to that line of stitching, all right? So I'll do the same thing to the other one, and then I'll meet you back here. Now let's go back and reference what it asked us to do when we were stitching in the sleeve. It said stitch, then stitch again 1/4 inch away. We did that. Trim close to the stitching. We just did that. Now it says press seam allowances flat, and then turn seam toward the sleeve. So I'm at the ironing board here, and that's what we're going to work on next. So, all right, so to press the seams flat, I'm just turning this wrong side out. And I'm just going to give it a little press. And I do have some steam on my iron. I find that rayon holds a really good press. All right, so that one's flat. And you can see that as we press it flat, it's already going towards the sleeve, just like the instructions told us to do. So all I do is kind of just give it a little press, and that's it. Repeat it to the other sleeve. Then we'll turn the entire top right side out and move on. All right, here we are. Now you can also use a ham. Sometimes I don't like the crease that I make by pressing it flat there at the shoulder seam. So I will just put a pressing ham inside of the sleeve. And because it has more of a curve or rounded shape, it gets rid of that crease there a little bit better. Now while I'm here, since I didn't press before, I usually will just go right ahead and press the side seams as well. And I just kind of grab it like this to make sure that there's no fabric getting tucked in there, hidden. So this is what we have now. Next, let's move on to the step where we need to attach the neckband. So let me briefly give this a little press. Get rid of any wrinkles along the neckline. And let's grab our single fold bias tape. And that's it for video number 7. I hope you enjoyed it. As you can see, we are this close to finishing our top. Definitely go ahead and leave me a comment below if you're enjoying the video series. Let me know what little nuggets of information that maybe I've shared with you that you didn't know previously before you watched this video sew along. I'd love to hear that information from you. If you enjoyed the video and you're enjoying this sew along, go ahead and give my video a thumbs up below. Share it with any of your friends who want to try making their own clothes, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.